All right, so we're going to go over a little warm-up today about some common types of word problems that we see when we're going over section 1.2. A lot of them have to do with money. So we're going to jump right in. So we're going to start with number one. So suppose we have 4 nickels, 3 dimes, and 5 quarters. How much money do we actually have? And as it says in the warm-up here, that's important to help us with the actual types of word problems that look a little more involved. And what's important to remember here is the money from coins. We can figure it out by taking the number we have, and we multiply that by the value. So for instance, if we have 4 nickels, that means we have 4 nickels, and how much is each nickel worth? And over here on the warm-up, it is provided as a little reminder of how to write money as a decimal. So 5 cents is $0.05, so $0.05. So we just keep going. So I would again add the number that we have. I would multiply that by its value. So the next coin, we have 3 of them, and the value of a dime, well, it's $0.10. And the last thing we need to calculate, again, we would take the number we have and multiply it by its value. And the next thing is we have 5 quarters, and each quarter is worth $0.25. And at this point, we just multiply, and it's okay to use your calculator. 4 nickels is 20 cents. 3 dimes, plus 3 dimes is 30 cents. And then 5 quarters is $1.25 for a total, so these add up to 50 cents. So that's a total of $1.75. That's just a little warm-up to help us get started on problems that we actually run into on quizzes and tests and stuff like that. So what I included on the top of the warm-up is the basic 4-step approach that we started with. It's not super specific, but it gets us going. So the first step is always obviously read the problem. So if we have a pile of coins in front of us that consist of only quarters, nickels, and dimes, so there's no pennies, so very similar to what we had in number 1, we have some change. But they tell us we have 3 fewer dimes and quarters, and we have 3 more nickels than we do quarters. So if the total was $2.65, how many of each coin do we have? So we read it. Now, directly after we read it, we had talked about trying to define our variables, because if we're going to write equations, we need to know a letter to use. What we had talked about in class was to help us define our variable, there should be a question, or maybe it's phrased as a command, like find this, or determine, or calculate. So in this warm-up, I can clearly see a question at the end. I need to find how many of each coin that I have. So in other words, I need to find 3 things. First of all, I need to find the number of quarters. That's one of the coins I have. I also need to find the number of dimes, and then I need to find the number of nickels. So as we talked about in class, though, we can only use one letter, or in other words, one variable, to help us express all the things that we're missing. So if I'm missing 3 things, I can't use 3 different variables, so I would only be able to use one. So how do we figure that out? What we had talked about in class was trying to use or figure out what would I want to know first. So for instance, what one piece of information could I use to figure out all the other things that I'm missing? And what I'd ask you to think about is look at how they describe the dimes. If you wanted to figure out how many dimes you have, you would need 3 less than the number of quarters. So they use quarters to help us describe the dimes. Now when they're describing the nickels, we have 3 more than, again, the number of quarters. So notice how they're describing the dimes and the nickels in terms of quarters. If you knew quarters first, it'd be very easy to find the dimes and the nickels. For instance, let's say there's 3 quarters. If there's 3 quarters, which I'm just making up, if I know there's 3 fewer dimes, I would just take 3 and take 3 fewer, which would be 0. So that's really easy to find. Same thing with the nickels. If there's 3 more nickels than quarters, I would take the number of quarters I have and add 3 to it. So in other words, if I'm able to know the number of quarters first, I can easily figure out the number of dimes and the number of nickels. So I'm going to call my variable, which is x, I'm going to let that be the number of quarters. Because again, if I knew the number of quarters, I would just need 3 less than that to get the number of dimes. So I'd take the number of quarters and subtract 3. If I want 3 more nickels than quarters, I'd start with how many quarters I have and add 3. So we've defined our variable. Now the next step is to try to write an equation in words first, or set up some sort of fact that we know to be true before we start substituting symbols. And on your warm-up here, the words are already there for us. Like we know as a fact, if I want to figure out how much money is in front of us, just like we did in number 1, we take the money from the quarters, we added it to the dimes, and we added it to the nickels, right? That's what we did here. The money from the the nickels, we added it to the money of the dimes, and we added it to the money of the quarters. So we just add them all together. So, well, how do we do that? We can start substituting now. We know how much money we have. They told us we have $2.65. So I like to lightly cross out a number when I use it. We did use 3 fewer for our variables, and we did use 3 more. So we should be able to kind of plug everything in. So how do we figure out the money from quarters? Well, we already did that up here, right? We take the number that we have and multiply it by its values. Well, how many quarters do we have? Well, that I don't know. So I have this number of quarters. Again, I don't know what it is. Sorry, number we have. And then we multiplied that by its value. So the number we have, we don't know, right? That's how we wrote the number of quarters, but we do know that each quarter is worth 25 cents. Let's keep going. Well, how do I figure out the money from the dimes? Well, like we did before, it'd be the number we have times their value. So in our situation, how many do we have? Well, we called that x minus 3. And then we'd multiply that by their value. Well, we know a dime is 10 cents. And similar to the number of nickels, or the money from the nickels. How many do we have multiplied by their value? So the number of nickels, we called the number x plus 3. And how many, or what are they worth? Well, nickels are worth 5 cents. So then from here, it's a nice equation that we can solve. So we can rewrite this as 0.25x because we do like to put in the number first. Now here we're going to have to distribute. So this is 0.10x. And again, it's okay to be using your calculator if you wanted to multiply -3 times 0.10. That helps you, but that's minus 0.3. And then again, we'd have to distribute this number as well. So we'd have 0.05x plus 0.15. And again, it's okay to be using your calculator. So let's combine our like terms. So we have this many x's. And again, it's okay to go to your calculator and type in the coefficients to help you with their addition. So we know, again, we have 2.65 is equal to, and when we add all these x's, it adds up to 0.4. So we have that many x's. And then I'm going to go ahead and combine these like terms as well, the negative 0.3 and that 0.15. And that simplifies to negative 0.15. So now we're going to isolate our variable. So we'll undo the subtraction by adding to both sides. So $2.65 plus 15 cents is equal to $2.80, and over here we have 0.40x. So we undo multiplying by 0.40 by dividing by 0.40, and we get this answer for x is 7. Now that doesn't mean we're done. We actually need to answer all the original questions. We're supposed to figure out how many quarters, nickels, and dimes they have. Well, x only answers one of those questions. X was the number of quarters, so we have 7 quarters. But the number of dimes was x minus 3. So I take 7 and minus 3, so that's 4 dimes. And then the number of nickels was 3 more, so that's 10 nickels. And if we go check 7 quarters, so 4 dimes, and 10 nickels. So on my calculator, I just did like we did in number 1, the number we have times their value, 4 dimes, and then 10 nickels. That comes out to be $2.65. So we know we're right. And that's one example.